Trump administration has deported 8 migrants to South Sudan. They were held at a military base in Djibouti for weeks. The deportations came after a federal judge denied an emergency request from the migrants' lawyers to stop them from being sent to the country. They argued the migrants could be tortured.
Breaking news from a federal judge in Boston, the latest of several to say the Trump administration could be violating court orders.
One by one, they were shackled, rushed through holding cells. No translators, no warnings, no family goodbyes. Just silence and a destination that none of them had ever set foot in. 8 men. Only one was from South Sudan. The others, from Myanmar, from Mexico, from Vietnam, from Cuba, from Laos. Yet they were all flown to a war-torn African nation they had no ties to, in direct violation of a U.S. federal court order. They weren't supposed to be on that flight. Judges begged for the planes to be turned around mid-air. Lawyers tried to locate their clients, only to find ICE had wiped their records. Some migrants vanished into thin air. Others surfaced in South Sudan, of all places. The U.S. government now calls them barbaric, but legal experts are calling this a human rights crime, hiding behind red tape. So what really happened on that plane? And why is Africa becoming the silent graveyard for unwanted migrants? In this video, let's find out. On paper, it looked like a standard deportation operation. In reality, it was anything but. The Trump administration deported 8 men from U.S. immigration detention in May 2025 on what should have been a routine flight. But instead of being returned to their respective home countries like Myanmar, Cuba, Mexico, Vietnam, Laos, these men were sent thousands of miles away to South Sudan, a nation engulfed in post-conflict volatility and political fragmentation. The absurdity begins with the demographics of the passengers. Only one of the 8 was South Sudanese. The rest had no national, ethnic, or legal ties to the African country. These were not just mistakes in paperwork. This was a blatant redirection of human lives into an unfamiliar and dangerous environment. And that redirection may have violated both domestic U.S. court orders and international norms. Several of the men didn't even know what was happening to them until moments before boarding. According to legal filings, language barriers were ignored, with some detainees being informed of their destination without interpreters present. This wasn't just a procedural oversight, it was a fundamental denial of due process. One Burmese migrant, who reportedly spoke little English, was simply told he would be transferred. No explanation, no consent, and certainly no legal defense. Initially, the deportation didn't even land in South Sudan. The plane was diverted to Djibouti, a small country in East Africa that hosts a major U.S. military base. There, the men were held in limbo on the base grounds for several weeks, hidden away from lawyers, courts, and even family members. The reason? A federal court in Boston had issued a legal stay, effectively ordering that no third-country deportations could proceed until detainees were granted a hearing to challenge the legality of being removed to a nation that wasn't theirs. The judge behind that decision, Brian Murphy, made it clear: deporting individuals to countries where they have no ties, without proper legal review, could constitute a constitutional violation. The stay was meant to pause all such flights, but what the courts were trying to stop, the White House was determined to finish. Just days later, the U.S. Supreme Court unexpectedly lifted the stay, ruling in favor of the Trump administration. That single legal pivot became the administration's green light. The very next day, the migrants were hastily transferred out of Djibouti and flown to Juba, South Sudan's capital. There was no public notice, no statement from DHS, and no confirmation of their fate. The names of the migrants disappeared from U.S. immigration records. Lawyers who were set to meet them for virtual hearings found their clients missing, no longer in custody, and with ICE refusing to disclose their final destination. Judge Murphy, clearly enraged, summoned Justice Department Attorney Miriam Perez to court. In a highly unusual move, he ordered her to track down the exact location of the plane, warn the pilot, and contact top officials in the Department of Homeland Security. He declared that all parties involved could be held in criminal contempt if they had violated the stay. Perez stunned the courtroom with her response. She didn't know where the plane was. By then, the plane had landed. The men had disappeared into a nation reeling from internal strife, violence, and famine. No media access, no consular records, no contact. To this day, the current status of the 7 non-Sudanese deportees remains unknown. South Sudanese officials have not confirmed whether the migrants were released, detained, or deported elsewhere. Rumors swirl that they may be trapped in remote detention centers, or worse. This was no ordinary deportation. This was a calculated act that bypassed legal norms, ignored due process, and threw human lives into a geopolitical void. And the worst part? It worked. No accountability, no explanation, just a one-way flight into oblivion. That's because for Donald Trump, deportation is not merely a policy, it's a punishment. And in 2025, the former president's second-term immigration strategy is revealing just how far the boundaries can be pushed, bent, or shattered. When questioned by reporters about the South Sudan deportations, the Trump administration didn't blink. Instead, they celebrated it. In official statements, the deportees were described as barbaric, violent criminals and people convicted of heinous crimes, including murder, sexual assault, and armed robbery. According to the White House, they were illegal alien predators who deserved no sympathy, no platform, and certainly no presence on American soil. President Trump, speaking at a rally, boasted that the removal was necessary to protect the American family from monsters, and emphasized that they would never again hurt a man, woman, or child on U.S. soil. But behind the tough-on-crime rhetoric lies a web of constitutional violations, legal sleight of hand, and what human rights advocates are calling a deliberate evasion of U.S. law. Because even if these men had criminal records, and some certainly did, it does not erase their right to due process, nor does it justify being banished to countries with no legal relevance to their identities. In fact, under standard immigration law, deportation is supposed to follow a clearly defined path: removal to a person's home country or, under specific legal circumstances, to a third country, but only if the migrant is notified, consents, or loses an appeal after being informed of the transfer. None of that happened here. According to lawyers representing the migrants, no proper hearings were held, and no consent was given. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, and current affairs impacting your lives. What's more chilling is how the deportations occurred. Multiple detainees only realized where they were being sent after they were gone. In one case, an attorney discovered their client was missing when the ICE detainee locator returned a bizarre result: South Sudan. This wasn't a coding error. It was an official transfer, hidden from public scrutiny, executed in a legal gray zone. This led to a rare moment of outrage in a U.S. federal courtroom. Judge Brian Murphy, already on edge from the Trump administration's past immigration overreaches, warned DHS and DOJ officials that they may be in direct violation of his April order, which had barred the deportation of at least one Burmese national until he had the chance to contest being sent to a third country. Judge Murphy's warning wasn't subtle. He threatened criminal contempt against everyone involved, including ICE field agents, lawyers, and even the pilot of the aircraft. This raises a terrifying precedent. If the administration can disappear migrants mid-flight, ignore federal orders, and then simply claim ignorance, What part of the legal system still holds? Trump's defenders argue that the Supreme Court lifted the stay, giving the deportations a legal pass. But legal scholars argue otherwise. The lifting of a stay does not undo the rights violations that occurred prior, nor does it sanitize the lack of notice, legal access, or transparency that defined the case. But a question arises here. Why was South Sudan chosen as the destination? South Sudan is not a neutral destination. It's a country barely a decade old, still recovering from a brutal 5-year civil war that displaced millions and killed hundreds of thousands. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory for the country, citing violent crime, civil unrest, kidnapping, and armed conflict. So why send migrants there? The official line is that South Sudan agreed to take them. But human rights lawyers argue that such deals are opaque, legally questionable, and often economically coerced. Countries like South Sudan, Rwanda, and Benin are mentioned as potential partners in exchange for military aid, diplomatic support, or covert incentives. What's more disturbing is that only one of the deportees is actually South Sudanese. This raises the possibility that the U.S. used the country's fragile governance and lack of international scrutiny as a dumping ground for unwanted detainees. In short, South Sudan didn't offer asylum. It offered silence. Now, the Trump administration's tactic of third-country deportations is setting a dangerous precedent. Under international law, particularly the United Nations Convention Against Torture, it is illegal to deport someone to a country where they are at risk of torture, persecution, or inhumane treatment. Yet that is exactly what critics say is happening. Immigration attorneys argue that detainees were denied interpreters, not given legal representation, and transferred in secret. The lack of transparency has made it almost impossible for lawyers to locate their clients, let alone advocate for their rights. In court, this has sparked a wave of legal actions. Multiple federal judges have warned the administration against unlawful removals. Some have even discussed holding officials in criminal contempt for ignoring court orders. Yet the deportation machine rolls on. The Supreme Court's decision to lift the temporary stay is not an endorsement. It is a procedural move, pending a full review. But the Trump administration is treating it as a green light, using it to justify rushed deportations with no accountability. And while the legal battles rage on, the men remain missing. No one knows whether they were detained, released, or thrown into South Sudan's overcrowded detention facilities. No one knows if they are alive. And what's happening in South Sudan is part of a larger, more disturbing trend: the outsourcing of deportation to vulnerable African nations. The U.S., like some European countries, is increasingly pursuing deals with poorer nations to take in deportees, regardless of nationality. Rwanda has been in negotiations. Benin, Equatorial Guinea, Eswatini, and even Moldova have appeared in leaked reports. These are countries that often lack the infrastructure to process, house, or protect foreign deportees. For Africa, this strategy is a double-edged sword. While hosting deportees may bring short-term aid or diplomatic leverage, it also burdens nations already struggling with internal displacement, economic instability, and fragile governance. Simply accepting deportees means carrying the weight of the United States' responsibility on their shoulders, with the deportees having an uncertain fate. What do you think? Why did Trump send 7 men with zero ties to Africa, dumped in a nation that's on America's own do not travel list? Isn't it true that Trump is using small countries, especially African, to shift the blame and responsibility? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on what happens if Saudi Arabia dumps Americans in a third world country. Will Trump accept that? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, changing world order, and current affairs. Things you need to stay informed. Thanks for watching, And until the next video, stay tuned.